Why does gaming feel bad in a way that other entertainment doesn't? It's not because games are a waste of time. It's not because they're bad for our brains. Most of us call that nagging, unpleasant feeling gaming guilt. It's the thing that makes us second guess every hour we spend with a controller in hand. But guilt isn't the only emotion at play. There's something else. It's quieter, it's far more insidious, and it's often hiding behind our guilt, shaping how we see ourselves without us even noticing. And in 2004, I had my first encounter with it. In 4th grade, I discovered a video game that would go on to change the course of my life. And it was all thanks to my classmate, Dylan, who was an oddball, with some pretty aggressive takes for a 10-year-old, completely unrelated. But at one point he was like, "Yo dude, last day of 4th grade, let's go burn our textbooks in my backyard." So yeah, that was Dylan. I think he meant well, but more importantly, the two of us shared a common interest in gaming. One day after class, Dylan says he wants to show me something he's been playing. He takes me to the desktop and pulls up Internet Explorer. So at this point, I'm fully expecting some janky stick figure game on Miniclip. But then I hear the music. Eventually, the jagged polygons of Dylan's character model pop in beside that stone-themed UI. And I wonder, what exactly am I looking at? Dylan tried to explain RuneScape to me, but it was too different from the games I knew for me to even comprehend. Wait, what do you mean there are 1,200 other people in our world right now? How is that even possible? After watching Dylan play for a while, I was still bewildered, but I knew there was something special about RuneScape. It sparked my curiosity in a way that I couldn't ignore. An MMO, a massive multiplayer online video game. Fast forward a year and I have fallen deep down the RuneScape hole. As a big brain efficiency play, my best friend Pranay and I decided to share our account. We couldn't be logged in at the same time, but it meant we could take different shifts throughout the day and reap the rewards of our collective efforts. The two of us would debrief multiple times a week. We would set long-term goals and timelines for our account. RuneScape had wedged itself squarely into my life. When I wasn't playing it, I was often thinking about it, reading forums, wondering how we could get our hands on that rare item we dreamed about. Naturally, I found myself in many altercations with my older sisters over who got to use the single computer in our house. It wasn't just my sisters who had caught on to my obsession, though. My parents were also keenly aware by this point. After countless weekends where I stationed myself for hours at that PC, clicking the same rock, the same tree, over and over and over again, it was inevitable that they would raise an eyebrow. On one late summer morning, I had woken up early to get in some runs of Castle Wars before it was back to grinding our cooking stat. But when I sat down in front of the computer, something felt off. I took a big bite of my Cinnamon Toast Crunch, and then it hit me. Where the fuck was the keyboard? That's strange, I thought. I had just used it the night before. After giving the room a quick scan, I considered the possibilities. Even though I didn't want to believe it, the facts couldn't be ignored. This was no accident. That keyboard had been intentionally displaced. By who or for what reason? Well, I was pretty sure I knew the answer to both of those questions. It had to be my dad trying to discipline me. For a few weeks leading up to this moment, my dad had been dropping some hints here and there. He would say things like, "Hey son, I was just thinking, would you maybe want to get the fuck off your ass and diversify your recreational time like a healthy goddamn human being?" To which I would usually respond non-verbally. After all, what was I doing wrong? I was going to school. I was doing my homework. I was even touching grass. Or pavement, rather. When Pranay and I weren't on RuneScape, we were often locked into hours of cutthroat one-on-one basketball in his driveway. Despite all that, I started to feel sour for playing so much RuneScape. But I tried my best to suppress those feelings and stick to my guns. Well, it seemed I had forced my dad into his plan B. Systematic intervention. If he won't make the choice on his own, I'll make it for him. Instead of approaching my dad for a level-headed discussion on what a balanced lifestyle looks like, I gave him the metaphorical "fuck you" and swore myself to tearing apart the entire house until I tracked down that damn keyboard. And wait, it was just stashed in the wooden cabinets right next to the desk in the same room as the computer? For years, this confounded me. Surely my dad could have come up with a better hiding spot than that. Right, Dad? Comment down below. But I think I understand now. After all, he knew how much I loved RuneScape, so the pain of ripping it from me entirely was probably too terrifying for him to handle. He wanted to send me a message, perhaps a warning, but he wasn't ready to come in with the crowbar and take out my knees just yet. Well, the message did come through, and for the next few weeks, we were tangled up in this bizarre song and dance, with his hiding spots getting ever so slightly more inconvenient, while I continued to not address the behavior whatsoever. I know you're all on the edge of your seats by this point, wondering, where is he gonna hide it next? Does he snatch the mouse this time? Are they ever gonna confront each other? But here's the truth. I don't really remember what happened, and neither does my dad. Maybe I snapped at some point. Maybe my mom got involved. Maybe things just fizzled out and we moved on with our lives. I know I stopped playing RuneScape at some point. Probably around the time when our main account got banned for programming a ghost mouse to do alchemy spells while we slept. Oh, that one stung harder than my first breakup. But why am I even telling you this story? It's because that was the first time I can remember feeling like there was something wrong with me for wanting to play video games. That was my introduction to shame. Over the next 2 decades, guilt would enter the picture too. But the more time I spent trying to understand and fix these emotions, the more I realized that confusing the two of them is what makes them such a dangerous combination. When I finally fell off RuneScape, it was amidst my transition into everyone's favorite stage of life, the glory days of early adolescence. Instead of spending my days popping party balloons in Falador, I was popping pimples on the crater that was my face. Because it turns out that having long, greasy bangs that just saturated my forehead 24/7 with oils was actually not helping. Weird. So yeah, middle school was pretty sick, but by far the sickest thing to happen to me in middle school was discovering Halo. And it was all thanks to my classmate, Brett, who was an oddball with some pretty aggressive takes for a 13-year-old. This is completely unrelated, but at one point he was like, "Yo, dude, is it just me or is my mom like pretty hot?" So yeah, that was Brett. I think he meant well, but more importantly, two of us shared a common interest in gaming. One day after school, I'm over at Brett's house and his pretty hot mom is making us some Totino's pizza rolls. Brett loads a disc into his 360 and tosses me a controller. "You ever played Halo?" he asked. I shook my head. I had heard of it, but didn't know much about it. He explained that Halo 3 had just come out and said it was the best one yet. Well, all right, let's see what this Halo 3 is all about. It was a RuneScape situation all over again. Just like back then, I struggled to comprehend how we could be sitting there in Brett's basement shooting other players that might be thousands of miles away. And then, of course, there was the voice chat.
"You suck. You're bad at this game.
Don't go crying to your mommy when we kick your ass, just to let you know."
Halo was another paradigm shift in my understanding of what a game could be. And just like with RuneScape, I found myself craving for more. It didn't take long before the game was consuming most of my free hours, but the difference this time around was that I was a little bit older, which meant school was a little more serious, my budding social life a little more important. And all those driveway hoop sessions had started to pay off because I had also earned a spot on my middle school basketball team. Each of these areas started to require more of my attention, and yet the gravitational pull of Halo would often overpower them. Instead of putting up shots on a Sunday morning, I was spending hours trying to hit the next rank in team doubles. With Halo, my parents weren't as blunt in the delivery of their concern. Their biggest beef was about letting me play an M-rated game, which is a battle I know many of us have had to fight. But after that blew over, they were mostly concerned with whether I was making friends at the new school I had transferred into in 6th grade. I lived pretty far from school and most of my classmates, and I remember my dad insisting that he would drive me to anyone's house, no matter the distance, if it meant I'd be building some relationships. And although I probably rolled my eyes and dismissed his offer initially, at some point I did take him up. It's probably too generous to call it self-reflection, but I eventually realized that having a social life at my new school was important. I wanted to get closer with the kids on the basketball team, and I wanted to be invited to things. This was the biggest difference with my RuneScape phase. Back then, I had felt a level of shame for my play, which was mostly driven by other people signaling to me that I was wasting my time. My dad arbitrarily hiding the keyboard was him saying normal kids don't play this much, without really explaining how he arrived at that conclusion. Absent that critical bridge in understanding, I naturally reacted with defensiveness and avoidance. With Halo, I wasn't just a kid anymore. Even though it had only been a few years, my life was starting to change. Even I could see that. I had reached a point where thinking about what I wanted right in that moment wasn't the only priority anymore. And I slowly became aware that spending all of my weekends on my Xbox would actually limit me from engaging with something else I was starting to care about. Something that seemed like it might grow in importance as I continued to mature. When I caught myself binging Halo and losing sight of those other areas of my life that I was starting to prioritize, I felt that uneasiness. Like I tasted a bit of spoiled milk in my Saturday morning cereal.
I am the milkman. My milk is delicious.
But this time, it wasn't quite shame that I felt. Although I didn't know it then, what I was experiencing was actually by design. It was a constructive mechanism of my brain. I was feeling classic Western guilt. Much like our noses and taste buds can sense when we eat something that's off, my psyche was shooting a flare because my behavior wasn't true to my current values. And instead of feeling sick in my stomach, the guilt manifested as a sort of mental queasiness, only to be cured by taking corrective action, by realigning my choices. In her 2002 exploration of moral emotions, psychologist June Price Taney lays out a critical yet often misunderstood distinction between shame and guilt. Both of these emotions have played essential roles in our survival and growth as a human species. Without them, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that we might not have functional societies. And without functional societies, there would be no video games. But these emotions are not interchangeable. They each serve unique evolutionary purposes. Shame exists to protect inclusion. In perfect conditions, it can be a healthy, yet always painful reaction to violating a social norm. If you keep going rogue and abandoning the main objective in a cooperative game, your teammates will probably express their displeasure with you, whether through direct confrontation or most likely shit-talking you behind your back. You then start to notice that you're getting fewer party invites, and pretty soon, nobody is asking you to play anymore. This is shaming, and the pain you feel is an exclusionary burn. Being ousted from the tribe is lonely, dangerous even. The emotion is urging you to admit your breach and apologize to your teammates with the hope that they might let you back into the group. When working properly, the fear of being shamed often prevents us from breaking those social norms in the first place. Guilt, on the other hand, is not about social dynamics. It's about personal bonds and the behaviors that contribute to them. Where shame is concerned with group belonging, guilt is concerned with individual relationships. Relationships with those we care about, and relationships with ourselves. It asks the question, did I hurt someone? And if the answer is yes, guilt motivates us to repair the damage we've done and to change our behavior in the future. The guilt I felt when I was no-lifing Halo instead of practicing my free throws or making an effort to build friendships at my new school, that was a reflection of the damage I was doing to myself. In that instance, guilt was a positive force trying to pull me back on the course that I knew I wanted to be on. Guilt was working for me. But as I had discovered during the disappearing keyboard saga, shame is far from a flawless feature in our psychology. And the more rapidly our society has transformed, the more confused it's become. Throughout my high school and college years, video games remained a staple recreational activity for me. I never stopped enjoying them. but I also wasn't playing them as much. It was my social life that commanded most of my attention during that delicate period of adolescence. When I wasn't busy with school or sports, I was usually IMing, texting, trying to hang out with friends. There wouldn't be another game like RuneScape or Halo that would consume me to the same degree, at least for a while. Gaming felt pretty good over those years. Sure, I might blow off a homework assignment or cut studying short every so often so I could play some GTA, but when that happened, guilt would typically do its job and push me to put in a bit more effort next time. I was able to enjoy gaming for what it was and what it provided me. Where things started to change was after I graduated. I had no official job lined up after college. Instead, I pursued a somewhat loose arrangement with a professor who enticed me with an opportunity to work with an interesting local startup. But after months of essentially unpaid internship, things started to get pretty awkward, and it became clear that there would be no future for me there. After I stepped away, I found myself frustrated at the situation and unsure of where to go next. Throughout that period, I would go through stretches where I felt quite aimless and increasingly more doubtful of the choices I had made up to that point. I reached to games during that period out of a need for comfort. No longer did I have the familiar structure of formal schooling to keep me grounded. No longer did I see all of my best friends on a daily basis. There was one game in particular that became my warm fireplace during those times of uncertainty. A tale about a stoic monster hunter in a somber and unforgiving world. The Witcher 3 would be the first game to envelop me in years since my obsession with Halo. And it was all thanks to my classmate, Jules, who actually became a really close friend of mine. He did bash his head open and get a concussion at my wedding, but accidents happen. And more importantly, the two of us share a common interest in gaming. Jules and I were texting one day about what game I should buy next. I mentioned I'd been eyeing the upcoming Mass Effect, which was due out in just a few days. But mercifully, Jules knew better. He told me that Mass Effect Andromeda was probably gonna flop and said that The Witcher 3 would be a much better pick for what I was looking for. Yeah, I'd say you were 2 for 2 on that one, Jules. Over the next couple months, I would go on to spend hundreds of hours exploring the swamps of Velen, the cliffs of Skellige, and the alleyways of Novigrad. I was in awe of this game. Never before had I been so thoroughly transported into another reality. The breathtaking open world, the sharp, often hilarious writing, and an ensemble of dynamic and memorable characters made for a uniquely engaging experience. I needed The Witcher in those moments. It gave me somewhere else to exist, somewhere where I didn't have to face the reality that I had no idea what was next for me. It was during my playthrough that I finally worked up the courage to start sending out job applications in 3 different states, which was an admission to myself that the familiar life I was clinging on to in my college town was not going to last forever. But after the first few weeks of job hunting, I was already growing doubtful. Would anyone actually hire me? Most of the time, I heard nothing. In the rare instances where I managed to get on the phone with a recruiter, it only took them a few minutes to clock how naive and unprepared I was for a full-time role. Hell, I didn't even know what most of these jobs were. I had a marketing degree, but none of my professors ever really explained what entry-level marketers do. 2 months had gone by and I had almost nothing to show for it. That's the worst part about job hunting. There's no sense of gradual progress. You are 0% complete up until the moment that it suddenly turns to 100%. There were many days when I wanted to give up, and some days when I did. During those days, I retreated into my fantasy land where progress was measurable, where I could level up and gain new skills. But something was changing. It was getting harder to immerse myself as Geralt, The Witcher's main character. The game was right in front of me, yet I struggled to focus. Routine combat encounters were suddenly a source of frustration, and I grew increasingly impatient just traveling through the world. More and more, my sessions were tainted with this vaguely familiar sourness, but not the kind that motivated me. I remember one evening, I set out to explore some remaining points of interest in the Scandinavian-inspired region of Skellige. I spent a couple hours sailing my boat across the lonely ocean from one map marker to the next. After I cleared the last one, I just sat there staring at my TV and I snapped. What was I doing? Why did I stay in this town? Why didn't I start looking for a job when everyone else was? Why was I wasting my time like some worthless bum? What is wrong with me? Those questions reverberated, and I wondered, was this guilt I was experiencing? Did I do a bad thing by pursuing a project that had genuinely interested me? Had I wronged someone by not taking the conventional next step after college? I wanted to shut those voices up, but there was nothing specific to repair. No clear action to take outside of what I was already doing. This wasn't guilt. Guilt was what pushed me to bounce back after a lazy, unproductive day. But guilt wouldn't tell me that I was useless. That must be a different force. Tangni says that in shame, the self is the focus of evaluation. Shame targets our identity. It is a condemnation of who we are at our core. Shame is supposed to preserve harmony in tangible social groups. But in the age of the internet, of smartphones, of social media, groups are increasingly intangible, and shame is fundamentally unequipped. Shame doesn't understand news feeds and group texts and how many likes you get on an Instagram post. Shame can't grasp a culture shaped by hundreds of millions of individuals. Shame is an antique, attempting to stay relevant in a bizarre, futuristic world. And just like an old vintage car trying to keep pace on a modern highway, shame is at risk of misfiring. There I was, clinging on to my college lifestyle, when most of my friends were out in the real world, starting their careers, meeting people, having new experiences. And my parents, though supportive, were starting to get worried that I might not leave the nest after all. But it wasn't any of those people in my ear telling me that I was a failure for fumbling my transition into the post-college world. The voices I was hearing were assumed. Shame heard those imagined voices and took them as a cue. Playing video games just made things hurt more. So I stopped reaching for the controller. Of course, I couldn't bear the monotony of job hunting without some form of relief. So when I wasn't crashing college parties at a school I no longer attended, I just found myself binging cartoons and anime. Looking back on that time, nearly a decade later, I challenged myself to be objective about the situation I was in. I wanted to know, did shame have a point? Despite the sickness I felt, was it helping me? Eventually, I did find a job. When I hung up the phone with my manager, I clenched my fists and screamed, in part out of excitement, but mostly out of relief. In that moment, I felt the shame leaving my body alongside the air from my lungs. I first texted my family with the news, and then I reached for the controller and booted up The Witcher 3. If I imagine going back to my senior year of college, starting my job application sooner, brushing off that exciting yet risky project with my favorite professor, I probably could have prevented all of that pain. If the fear of shame had pushed me to take the recommended path, the path that most people were taking, I could have stopped shame from ever afflicting me. Shame was trying to tell me that I was a failure for not taking that recommended path, for wasting my time on childish video games. But there was nothing wrong with me. The situation I was in was a result of choices I had made and outcomes beyond my control. I had chosen to take a gamble on that project instead of applying to corporate marketing jobs. And when that didn't pan out, I had chosen to start looking for other opportunities. I had chosen how long I would spend on applications each week and how much recreation I would allow myself. Did I get all of those choices right? In a vacuum, probably not. But shame doesn't deserve a say in that. No, that's for guilt to handle. Guilt should be the one to remind me that I had planned to prepare for that interview, but decided drinking with my roommates was more fun. Guilt should speak up when I routinely blew off texts from my parents asking me how things were going. Guilt was trying to help me. Shame was just ignorantly hurting me. When I hear people struggling with gaming guilt, they often talk about how they can't escape the feeling that they're wasting their time. They say they wish they could just go back to enjoying games like they used to, like when they were younger. By this point, I hope it's become clear that statements like these are often conflations of the two emotions in this video. Most of the time, gamers suffering from these feelings aren't actually talking about guilt in its purest form. More often, what they're describing is a cluster of feelings somewhere in between guilt and shame. In this area of the spectrum, the narratives that we've internalized about productivity ideals and gaming being a childish distraction can start to seed doubt about the value of our character. It's the zone that often leaves us in frustrating loops of rumination, arbitrary rule setting, and inevitable rule breaking. As we move further toward shame on the continuum, that's where we see more dangerous tendencies emerge. Broad self-criticism, secrecy, dysphoria, and in some cases, total withdrawal or rebellion. At this end, the emotions are no longer a reaction to our behavior. They're reactions to feeling like the wrong kind of person, someone who doesn't belong in the group. And shame is uniquely capable of making us feel this way. But why is it that video games seem particularly susceptible to this warped version of shame? Well, try this experiment. Ask your parents to describe the average gamer. What would they say? As my dad demonstrated early on in my life, the older generations have already framed a perspective on video games that, despite plenty of conflicting evidence, has just managed to stick around and permeate the culture. They define the tropes of video games as escapism, avoidance of the real world, as addictive, drug-like entertainment. Is there some truth to these labels? Definitely, and I don't want to pretend like there isn't, but it's found in the extremes. And guess what? The exact same critiques can be made of TV and social media, activities that your parents probably enjoy. Yet, those activities don't invite shame in quite the same way. Part of the reason is because they are so common. The assumption is everybody uses Instagram, everybody watches Netflix, but only some people play video games. If we test that assumption, the story isn't so simple. In the US, almost half of adults reported playing some kind of video game in 2025, which sure includes a lot of mobile gamers, but still, that is extremely common. About as common as having brown eyes. Yet the perception doesn't reflect that. The other factor that puts gaming at a disadvantage compared to other popular pastimes is that its output doesn't hold clear value in modern society. Going to parties and making new friends can build your social capital. Playing sports builds your physical capital. And reading books, watching TV, going to the movies, even shopping, those all build your cultural capital. They enable you to connect with others and demonstrate your tastes and opinions to society. But because there are fewer players than TV watchers, and because there is so much diversity in gaming, its value is diluted. I have friends whose Steam libraries look completely different than mine. So as a collective group of gamers, we don't often benefit from that same broad social capital with society at large. Unless we're talking about a game with massive reach and appeal, like GTA or Minecraft. The sad reality is that the hours you might spend playing 4X strategy games each week are worth less to society than staying up to date on the latest reality TV show. And that puts shame in a prime position to strike. But I want to be clear, while gaming is more susceptible to shame, that doesn't mean we're defenseless against it. Many of you watching this video will have identified with some or perhaps all of those negative feelings I've described on that guilt-shame spectrum. So this is where I'm gonna get tactical. Throughout all of the experiences I've talked about so far, and even more trial and error over the last decade as an adult gamer, I have slowly figured out how to better manage these emotions. I want to close out this video by sharing what I've learned, because I know that a lot of you guys who love video games are being robbed of the joy that they can bring. My goal was simple: to play and enjoy games without the burden of unproductive moral emotions. But to isolate and solve for those toxic feelings, I needed to figure out if there was any real guilt in what I was experiencing first. Because guilt was not the enemy. It had always served as a constructive force in my life, trying to signal to me when my behavior wasn't aligned to my values. And I realized that while I had a vague idea, I had never been clear to myself about what I did value in life. Without that clarity, it's no wonder I had trouble differentiating guilt from shame. So that was my first step: figure out what I valued. This takes a bit of honest introspection and pressure testing, but regardless of whether you struggle with the issues I've talked about, I'm a firm believer that everyone can benefit from defining their values. It gives you a master compass to orient all of your decisions with, which is a pretty huge advantage if you think about it. As for how to figure out your values, there are a lot of different techniques out there. You can find them here on YouTube or elsewhere on the internet. An approach I found powerful was the eulogy exercise. You ask yourself, what would you want a close friend to say about you, about your character at the end of your life, as all of your loved ones are gathered to celebrate you? It is amazing how quickly this thought experiment can filter out all the insignificant distractions in life. Once I had built confidence in my personal values, the next step was to line them up and compare them to my actual habits and behaviors. This was my big light bulb moment. Instantly, it revealed that there were discrepancies between what I said I cared about and how I actually acted. One of those blatant mismatches was about creativity. I had ranked creativity among my top 5 most important values, and yet in my mid-20s, I wasn't really making anything. It was no surprise then that I felt a tinge of guilt with a controller in my hand. Why wasn't I making time for something that I clearly cared about? That realization pushed me to start making music again, and eventually led to this YouTube channel. For me, addressing those value conflicts, the ones that were just hiding in plain sight, that ended up solving a huge part of the problem for me. Starting with values is essential because it allows you to untangle your guilt from any residual shame that might exist. And if we're able to identify our shame, that puts us in a position where we have a chance to do something about it. So my final task then was to figure out how to deal with that residual shame. And I can confidently say that today, in the year 2026, I'm still working on it. As I've grown more familiar with it throughout my life, I now understand that shame is a chronic affliction. There is no cure so long as other humans exist on this planet, but the symptoms can be managed. Shame can be weakened to the point where it's no longer a drag on the quality of your life. There are two strategies that helped me get to this point. The first was building on my awareness of the shame, understanding what triggered it, how intensely I felt it, the patterns that repeated around it, and eventually digging into where it came from, the sources of those internal narratives. Each of these investigations helped me move from being a victim of unconscious shame to being able to actively recalibrate my mindset toward it. With that improved awareness, I was then able to respond to the shame when it emerged, but I needed some tools to do that. So the second piece of the puzzle was building out a mental inventory of exercises that I could use when I felt shame bubbling up. The idea behind most of these exercises is simple. They help us to zoom out. We can get so caught up in the microcosm of our immediate lived existence that we forget how big the universe is and how small our individual thoughts and anxieties are. As with values exploration, we can borrow from established techniques to help us with perspective. The one I've relied on the most over the years is something called temporal distancing. Emotions are often strongest in the moments we first experience them, but as time goes on, the intensity of that emotion tends to taper. What this exercise does is asks you to predict how you might feel about an event as more and more time elapses. I can scarcely remember feeling bad about playing video games even 10 days after a session. So running through this exercise helps me to quiet those voices, knowing that they're probably gonna pipe down eventually anyway. There's one final tool that has completely changed my relationship with shame, something that Geralt himself convinced me to try, and that is meditation. I know, not the most exciting topic, and I'm sure someone at some point has tried to convince you to start meditating, so I'll keep it brief. Meditation is the most effective method I've found to help myself detach from my thoughts. It teaches that thoughts can't be controlled. Shame can't be controlled. But just like waves, those thoughts will come and then they'll go. And we don't have to attach ourselves to them. We can just let them recede. Games are important to me. They're not the most important, but I care a lot about them. Sometimes I play games when I should probably be doing other things. That'll happen. I can usually correct that. Games might not make me rich or earn me much cultural capital, but they bring me delight, and that alone gives them value in my life. That alone earns them the right to be enjoyed.